So I opened up a can of worms with my last video where I put succulents for indoor arrangements in pots with no drainage holes. These cute little planters are the ones in question. I kind of know that this is extremely controversial due to the belief succulents will rot at the slightest sign of water and don't really talk about it much because of this very reason. But it is time to tackle this head on and explain why I'd even consider such pots. As a nursery owner of 10 years, I have been growing succulents in all conditions and would like to share some of my experiences about what happens when it comes to succulents, no drainage holes and watering. Personally, I would only recommend growing succulents in pots without drainage when the watering can be controlled. So if you're planning on putting your succulents on a covered patio, in a greenhouse or indoors, they will be fine as long as they are not sitting in soggy potting mix. If you're putting plants indoors, you must use shade-tolerant succulents. Even if you do overwater, the water can be tipped out. In my experience, some succulents will start rotting if the potting mix is completely soggy for over a week. But even then, many varieties will survive. When pots are exposed to rain, there should always be a drainage hole. The annoying thing about all of this is that succulents are often lumped together as this one homogeneous group that has the same growing needs and requirements. But they are not all the same, and while some succulents, usually hybrids, could struggle in pots with no holes, many will actually do very well. When I plant out pots without holes for the markets or for myself, I would only use shade-tolerant succulents such as Haworthia, Ripsalis, Casteria, Aloe, Sansevieria, etc. All of the plants in this shot are suitable for pots without drainage. Here are some older pots I have sitting in the greenhouse, waiting to root in properly or to sell. None of these pots have holes. We've been really busy lately, so there's not that many here, but most of the pots are over 2 months old. This big pot over here is 3 months old and growing really well. Look at all those Haworthia babies at the end. The reason I'm showing you these is to prove that having succulents in pots with no holes is not an automatic death sentence, and they can grow really well in these conditions as long as you're careful with watering. But it is this overgrown pot I really wanted to talk about. I made this just before COVID hit and all my markets shut down. I've forgotten all about it and it's been growing happily outdoors in the rain. Because the pot is concrete, the water is able to seep out slowly through the walls, but I was surprised the cacti in this arrangement made it, as it's been raining heavily here in Eastern Australia for the past 2.5 years. However, even after seeing how well this pot is doing, I would not recommend keeping succulents in pots with no drainage outdoors. I guess I must have gotten lucky here. So, as long as you have the right succulents that get appropriate light and just enough water, arrangements like these can last surprisingly long. In my experience and opinion, most succulents die in pots with no drainage because of lack of light and not so much the lack of holes. Most succulents are just not suitable to be grown indoors long term. Nearly all of the succulents I'm showing you now are for outdoors. Inside, they will start stretching towards the light after a couple of weeks, lose leaves and eventually dry out or rot. The only time these sun lovers can survive indoors is if you have a sunroom or a large bright window getting the sun most of the day. The problem is that the colourful succulents look great in pots, and many places sell them as indoor plants in cute pots that usually have no holes. And when they inevitably die indoors, people often think that the fault is with their watering or pot having no drainage. Having said that, succulents can absolutely die due to being in holeless pots when they are watered too much. Some people just cannot help it but love them too much and think frequent watering is needed. I have had many customers who thought succulents need to be watered daily. Similarly, it is not unusual for people to think succulents need not be watered, ever. It is for this reason I started writing my blog and making videos. I truly hope I'll manage to help at least a few people. Another reason succulents can die is because of unsuitable potting mix. If it's too heavy on the sand, it can suffocate the roots even when you don't water that much. I would also not recommend using soil straight from the gardening pots, especially if they have no holes. I don't usually measure how much I water and just hose these down as the greenhouse gets pretty warm. But if you only water about 1/4 to 1/3 of the volume of the pot every 3 weeks or so, it is unlikely you will ever overwater. These measurements don't have to be precise. Roughly divide the pot or a similarly sized jar into 3 or 4 parts and pour the water straight in. As the watering is going to be pretty infrequent and the plants will have ample time to dry out, you can water straight over them to make sure the roots get wet. One great thing about succulents is that they will survive without water for weeks, if not months, so if you underwater, it will not hurt them. It is also possible to water based on how your succulents look. Once they start getting thirsty, wrinkles will appear on their skin and they will start to slowly shrivel. This is your cue to give them a good drink. But whatever you do, please, please, please don't spray your succulents. Misting or spraying the leaves frequently can, in my opinion, do quite a bit of damage. If you have a sensitive hybrid or cultivar like, say, Echeveria Romeo, you can easily rot it by spraying even if the roots are completely dry. Succulents thrive on light. Some need direct sun exposure while others will tolerate bright shade. If you have a sun-loving succulents like these ones and it is in a pot with no holes, a sunny spot on a covered veranda will do the trick. Alternatively, it can be outside but must be brought under cover when it rains too much. Indoor succulents also need ample light but should survive without direct sun. Closer they are to bright windows, better they'll grow. Also, do make sure the blinds are pulled up. Any potted plants will need to be maintained in some degree. Indoors, succulents will grow slowly and may not need to be touched for 2 or more years. It will mainly depend on the type of succulent and size of the pot. I would recommend repotting every couple of years or when your succulent starts looking a bit scruffy, losing leaves. The leaf loss is often a sign the plant is root bound and needs either a bigger pot or fresh potting mix. If the succulent has overgrown the original pot too much, a new, bigger home may be needed. If not, old potting mix can be shaken off and the plant can be repotted in the same pot using fresh potting mix. If the potting mix does not have slow-release fertilizer in it, make sure to mix some in. Alternatively, you can sprinkle some on top at the start of every growing season. Any dead leaves should be removed and the whole plant and roots should be scanned for pests such as mealybugs, aphids or scale. They can easily get indoors on clothing, pets or other plants you bring in. To conclude, succulents can happily live in pots without drainage as long as they are kept out of the rain, watered moderately and placed in a spot with plenty of light. If you are worried about succulents dying in such pots, a hole can always be drilled in with a diamond drill bit or masonry drill bit. And that's it for today. If you need to ask any questions, you can do so in the comments below. If you'd like to learn more about succulents, hit the subscribe button or go to our website succulentgrowingtips.com. Thank you for watching.